Good morning, Miss Allen.
Good morning. It's nice to see you. I'm excited to see that you've already dove into this task and annotated it. I'm really excited to talk to you about how you're going to plan for some certain scaffolds for your students today. I want to start by asking you, what ways are you going to chunk this text for your students?
Well, I think in math, because it's a word problem and it's a relatively short piece of text, which is also my task, I think to go sentence by sentence is probably most appropriate because we really want to figure out if we need the information or we don't need the information. So kind of going sentence by sentence, we can really determine what's going to be essential to setting up the equation or not.
Awesome. I think that is a very valuable way to chunk the text that you have in this task. So thinking about that chunking, what kind of vocabulary are you going to draw your students' attention to?
Well, I think one of the ones that really stands out right away is that word remaining because it does show up in the problem 3 times. And it can have multiple meanings in math. Sometimes when we hear remainders, we think about division. Sometimes when we hear remaining, we think about what's left over. It could signal subtraction. So I really want the students to just be able to kind of make sense of that word remaining as what wasn't eaten. So I think that's going to be a really important word to focus on. And then also some other words that jump out, especially from a mathematical perspective, is that word share. So share, that sometimes signals division because we learn about equitable sharing and we learn how to divide into equal groups. But there's really no indication that we're sharing this pizza equitably. So in this case, it's just going to mean to give out. But I do think that will be an important word for the students to discuss, as well as that word combined, because that's going to really hone in on what operation they're going to need to use to set up the problem. And then I know that in math, there's also another word I do want to draw the students' attention to, which might be that word sum, because in math we could have the sum spelled S-U-M, which is just a signal to add. And in this case, that S-O-M-E is really flagging that that's our variable, that's our unknown, which is our question mark. So I think it might also be beneficial to bring that into the discussion as well. So I think those words will really be a good starting place because ultimately the purpose of doing a close read for this task is to take that context and transfer it into an equation, which is that second standard for mathematical practice, reason abstractly and quantitatively. So I want my students to really be able to contextualize and then decontextualize the task. So transfer all this context into an equation, and some of those vocabulary words are going to be really helpful in determining the operation, what the variable is, and how we set that up to then solve.
I'm really glad that you pointed out some of the words in this task have multiple meanings because I think the students will definitely struggle with that. The only other one my eyes were drawn to was contribute. How do you plan on drawing students' attention to that one?
Yeah, I think ultimately, and maybe you have a suggestion, but we're also going to really have to figure out how we can put that question into our own words. So inevitably, we're going to have to discuss what contribute means when we get to that point. So a lot of times I like to pose to the students, like, how can we make sense of what this question is asking in our own words, and maybe tie it a little bit to what we've already discussed with share, which is giving.
Awesome. Love that connection. All right, so how are you going to scaffold and support students' needs by asking precise and focused questions during this task analysis?
Well, I think one of the things that's going to come up first is with this graphic, because we've already identified, especially when we did the qualitative analysis for the text complexity of this task, I have to really be able to make sense of that graphic in order to be able to enter into this task. So if I can't even make sense of what value that is, I'm going to have trouble moving forward with any of the mathematics. So I thought about some questions that I might be able to ask those students as we're working through. I could simply even say, how do you know this might be greater than 1? Or how many pieces of pizza are in one whole? So they could just start to make sense that one whole is out of 8 pieces, because I really anticipate the misconception coming with that 13/16. So I want to hone in on some questioning related to the graphic so that they can enter the problem and be able to start setting up the equation. And then even some more general questions like what represents the whole, would that number be your numerator or your denominator? Does the graphic show you more than one whole? How do you know? And then also, even just saying, what does 2 7/8 represent in this problem? And getting a little bit more specific so they can make those connections to the text.
I like that I hear you making connections to things that they've learned in other grade levels as well to kind of scaffold and build to get them to this level of complexity. I really like that you've already planned for that ahead of time.
Well, I do know that the 3rd grade standard is really all about the conceptual understanding of fractions. And then in our prior unit in 4th grade, we worked on decomposing fractions, and then with the like denominators, decomposing and composing them. And this is really bringing all of those concepts to fruition because now we're seeing it in a real-world application problem. So if they can't recall or access that 3rd grade standard or some of those prerequisite 4th grade standards, they're going to really struggle with this task. So I think questions that will allow them to recall some of those concepts will be really essential. And I want to make sure too that I don't forget those students that are approaching mastery on this problem. I don't want to just think about my struggling learners. So I thought of some scenarios or some questions that I could use for those students. Maybe tying into some estimation and reasonableness. Like I could say, if I need 5 pizzas to feed the entire staff, how much would I need to save? So just pushing their thinking a little bit further. And I know this will be really critical as I'm monitoring my groups to see what, which layer of understanding they're really falling into. And you could really use subtraction to solve this problem as well. So I could even say, could you solve this problem with a different operation to push their thinking even further?
I like that you've thought from every angle how you're going to present this task to all different learners in your classroom. That's an excellent strategy. Now, on that same topic, are there any other scaffolds that you might need to put in place in order to help make sure that all students are successful in your classroom?
Well, I think going back to what we were talking about before, like if you don't have mastery of those prerequisite standards, you're going to really struggle with this task. And that's all really going to come back to that conceptual understanding. So my thought is to have some blank circle models available for some of those students and even some different colored markers so that they could visually show me 2 7/8. They could visually show me what's missing and then try to use that visual understanding to create the equation. So I even have, I think in my lesson I put a sample here. These would just be like what the blank circle models could potentially look like for those students. And again, with the different colored markers.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I'm really excited to see this lesson in place in your classroom and see how the students handle close reading the task because I think you've planned really well for it and I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.